Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Voice of American Law Enforcement here on redmedia.com. I'm your host, Randy Sutton. Welcome to this week's show where right now I'm going to give you my view from the blue. I'm calling it the death knell of effective policing in New York City. As violent crime tears through what was once considered the safest major city in America, the New York City Council has declared war on its police. And through misguided legislation born of political considerations and driven by radical agendas propagated by groups like Black Lives Matter, it has sounded the death knell for effective policing. New York City recorded more shootings from May 2020 through mid-September than in all of 2019. A 97% jump in shootings and a nearly 45% surge in murders, along with similar increases of robberies, aggravated assaults, and sexual violence, has turned New York into a battlefield littered with the blood of innocents. But instead of showing compassion for the victims and a determination to make the citizens safer, the mayor, council, and other elected officials have revealed at best their ignorance of the issues and more likely their acceptance of this new norm. In fact, their actions indicate they are complicit in aiding criminality by effectively legislating protections for criminals while destroying the effective policing that for decades dramatically reduced violent crime and allowed New York City to flourish. I'm, of course, speaking of the New York City Council's vote to, quote, end qualified immunity and 7 other measures to reform NYPD, unquote. Watching the gleeful celebrations of their victory posted by New York City Council members and their lackeys in the media as they pontificated about the evils of law enforcement and the need to control and reform the police saddened me as a 34-year law enforcement veteran who remembers the bad old days of New York, when even I, as an armed police officer, avoided coming into the city because of the rampant crime. The ignorance of their grasp of the reality of violent crime and the lack of empathy for its victims and their families as they embraced laws that they created to shield the murderers, rapists, gang members, and other violent punks was truly pathetic to behold. As one who has gazed into the hollowed eyes of someone whose life has been shattered by violent predators, it's difficult to even comprehend the level of ignorance or the incredible devotion to the dogma of liberal theology that accompanies those who would discard their moral compass in the name of political agendas. But that is, in fact, the new reality of New York City. And the people of New York had best prepare themselves for the consequences of their own complacency to control those that they have elected. Because the ramifications of the reforms include the end of qualified immunity, which is probably the most misunderstood doctrine in policing, and it will cost lives, harm businesses, and disrupt communities. Why? Because by removing this simple protection of qualified immunity, police officers are at a far greater risk for being personally liable for any frivolous lawsuit filed against them. You see, what the city council wants you to believe is that qualified immunity protected the police from actions that violated people's civil rights. That is a lie, but they sold it as such because now every officer faces financial ruin for simply doing their job. And that's why you can expect your police to now do the very minimum of policing. For to do anything else now places they and their families in extreme jeopardy financially and psychologically. The words of Sergeant Ed Mullen, president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, City of New York Police Department, to the officers of the NYPD should send a chill down the backs of every New Yorker. Here's what he said. I'll quote. In light of the repeal of qualified immunity, you are strongly cautioned against taking any police action that could lead to physical engagement with any person. Also, you are strongly cautioned against any search of a car, a residence, or a person, because you are subjecting you and your family to potential civil liability and monetary damages, unquote. Black Lives Matter and other radical social justice groups have called for the most radical changes against the criminal justice system of the United States of America, including abolishing the police. Well, the City Council of New York has just, they've just about gone to the radicalism, and the people of New York will now pay that price. And that's my view from the blue.
Hello, I'm Randy Sutton. I'm the founder and national director of the Wounded Blue, the national assistance and support organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. We're a nationwide 501c3 charity that aids injured and disabled officers, whether those injuries are physical, emotional, or psychological. There is a crisis facing American law enforcement in today's society. The war on cops is very real. It's physical, it's emotional, it's social. There are many facets to it. And because of the violence that these men and women are facing every single day, injuries are mounting and mounting. Now, here's something that most people don't know, and that is that if you are injured in the line of duty, if you are severely injured, if you are disabled, your department may actually just toss you aside and throw you away. I know that that is a difficult concept to understand, but it's happening all over America. Imagine being shot in the head, as one Oklahoma officer was, and having your car repossessed, your house repossessed because your own department did not pay your medical bills. This is a reality. That's why our organization exists, to help these injured and disabled officers. I'm going to give you a startling statistic. 57,000 American law enforcement officers were physically assaulted just last year. Many of those assaults led to disabling injuries. These men and women need our help. They need your help. Please join us at thewoundedblue.org. That's thewoundedblue.org. See our film, which is on Amazon.com, called The Wounded Blue. And please do your best to help these men and women. They deserve it.
Well, welcome to the briefing room here at the Voice of American Law Enforcement. So today's kind of a special show. We're going to combine what I usually do as far as the briefing room goes, and then I usually introduce a guest. Well, the guest that I'm going to be telling you about right now is going to be with me for the rest of the show, because his expertise and his knowledge base is so tremendous, and he's so much fun to talk to that he's going to be my co-host today. His name is Dave Smith. I'll give you a little bit about his background. Former police lieutenant, internationally known speaker, writer, and law enforcement expert. After graduating from the University of Arizona while fighting forest fires, he began his police career in Tucson, Arizona, then joined the Arizona Department of Public Safety. As a career police officer, Dave held positions in patrol, SWAT, narcotics, training, and management. And he developed the popular Buck Savage video training series, and also was involved in the timeless book, The Tactical Edge, which has probably saved more cops than anything else. He currently trains through the Arizona-based Winning Mind seminars, and his signature course, The Winning Mind, is popular, timely, and available through U.S. and Canada. You can find him at www.jdbucksavage.com. Dave Smith, welcome to the show.
Hey, Randy, great to be here. I'll tell you what, in this time, in this day and age with all the stuff happening, it's a good time for you and I to talk.
Oh, well, I know this would be probably better over a couple of beers, but we do have a lot to talk about. Let's jump right in on what is on everybody's mind today, and that is the trial of the officer in Minneapolis, the former officer Chauvin. The trial began yesterday. I watched the opening statements, as I believe you did. What were your thoughts about those opening statements?
Well, it seems to me that one of the issues we have here is there's a lot of emotion tied up in this, and what I don't understand is how we're going to get around that emotional component. Even in the testimony of the witnesses, it's one of the problems that they face is you've got this video which is now shown and shown and shown and shown over and over and over again. But the question then becomes was the officer's action reasonable to an officer? And what hasn't been really brought out enough, and the defense has sort of alluded to this, it's what's going to be reasonable for an officer to do. What was that officer's training? You and I, if we follow our training, there's always been that shield we had, that we did what we were taught to do. The agency had to bear the onus of whether or not what they taught us was correct. Now we're in a situation where we're going to try to say everything the officer did was not just against what he was supposed to do, but with malice. And this is going to be a difficult situation, I think, for the prosecution to hurdle for them to cross over.
That's what, I was thinking that too when I was watching the opening statements. The prosecution seemed to be really focusing on the emotional aspects of this. I mean, the first thing he did was show the video. First thing right out of the bag was show the video, which of course we know is one of the most horrendous looking things you can imagine. So it's going to play on the emotions of people right off the bat. But they have a tremendous burden. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see how badly they overcharged here. They charged second-degree murder. They charged 3 levels of murder for one crime. And I think, to me, that shows me that they are not confident that they can get a conviction on this. And so they want a conviction so badly, they're willing to drop the degree to the point where, listen, just give us a conviction.
Well, and this is part of the problem is they continue to enhance the emotional component of this. And criminal justice is supposed to be literally, we all know the image of her is blindfolded. She's not supposed to see race, color, creed. She's supposed to look at the facts and weigh the facts. In this day and age with all this, quote, procedural justice, all these ideas about having justice somehow be restorative or some kind of thing. Retribution is what justice is. It's punishment. If you commit a crime, the state represents the victim. Now the whole thing is flipped on its head, where the system seems to protect the suspect and the victim is completely disregarded, as you've seen in places like LA and Chicago, where they've done away with bail. They aren't protecting the victims. Their victims' families are seeing no justice. And now we're in a situation where we have the law enforcement officer who was dealing with a subject who had committed a felony and was in obviously mental disarray, was intoxicated, was confused, and was complaining that he couldn't breathe sitting in the back of the car. And so to try to attribute malice to this is going to make it a little more difficult, certainly because you had the officers there. One of them was concerned. They're rookies, and one senior officer who, from all I've ever heard, was a real straight-laced, by-the-book guy. Make sure his gig line was always right from his shirt to his pants. His shoes were always shined, and he followed policies and procedures. The state they're going to keep aggravating this with their emotional component. The problem is people who are watching the trial, if they're not familiar with the criminal justice system and they're not familiar with use of force and they're not familiar with how things work, they're just going to say, well, this is really unjust. Well, no, it's the system. And to have a guy who's like on today's testimony, they had a martial artist, a mixed martial artist who witnessed it, giving commentary that to me was expert witness testimony that he's never been proven to be an expert with. The fact that you practice a martial art doesn't make you an expert. And certainly in the subtleties of a neck restraint. And this is the whole thing so when he gets contradicted by an expert witness, if this happens, the public's going to feel like, wow, how do they dare they disregard this expert in martial arts? So, yeah, I mean, the whole thing it's very aggravating to the emotional component in the society, which already is totally preloaded. So it's a tinderbox right now.
And that's got to be on the minds of those jurors as well. One thing I want to bring up before we put this story to bed, excuse me, is the timing of the Minneapolis City Council's decision to announce a settlement of $27 million to the family of George Floyd. Do you think that it just happened to be on the same day that the jury was chosen?
Sure. Well, I mean, why would it be otherwise? Heck no. I'm just, man, in this day and age, you know what? If it's political, it's legal. It's just becoming literally. We as a society are starting to develop that sense of that Soviet humor that you saw prevalent during the 70 years of the Soviet Union, where everybody just makes little aside jokes, but is afraid to speak out. So you see these cynical, and in America today, the meme has become the subtle political joke, the anecdote of our society that was the Soviet term for political humor. They used to say Stalin, he loved to hear jokes and arrest the jokesters. 200,000 people went to prison in a few years alone under Stalin for making jokes. And we're laughing about it now, but, it's not funny what's going on. And yet when you comment on it, to be canceled or to be condemned or to be whatever in our society today terrifies people to speak out. So we have this trial where you and I can see the flaws already in the prosecution. And yet there are those who would say, don't you dare criticize it, comrade, because we must get the correct result.
Yes,
if we don't get the correct result,
absolutely right. Personally, I think that the Minneapolis City Council should be investigated for jury tampering for their decision to announce what they did at the very day of the.
You and I both know that was no coincidence. Of course, it was not a coincidence. But again, in this day and age, we're starting to see things where you and I, who've always been law and order guys and always believed, certainly federal law enforcement has the integrity that we have. Yet we see laptops evaporate, emails evaporate. And when we get done with our investigations, we have one attorney who lied on an affidavit. You and I, if you and I falsified a search warrant, folks, everybody out there,
oh boy,
we would. Oh man, I mean, it would have been. And yet here it is. It appears to have been the de rigueur way of the FBI running investigations. So the politicization of our law enforcement, our military, and our courts is a terrible sign. And I really, this is one of the things I've become more and more cynical. But again, you and I can scream halt and nothing happens. So hopefully the people watching out there, when they think about it, they'll start speaking out too, because that's what it's going to take, America to just speak out.
So we're going to be watching the Chauvin trial with great interest, and it might be done by next week's episode. I don't know, but we'll certainly be keeping you advised on that from this show. Lots of stuff happening as far as anti-government law enforcement. Let's talk about what happened in New York City. This is so disturbing, and it kind of got brushed aside this week because of the Chauvin trial. But the New York City Council took an incredible step in basically declaring war against their cops when they backed a, quote, reform package, which included, amongst other things, the ending of qualified immunity for police officers for the city of New York. Now, the way they sold it, Dave, was that, well, this qualified immunity protected cops from being sued for violating people's civil rights.
No,
that is absolutely false. But that's how they've sold this bill of goods to people, and this is going to have incredible ramifications. Let's talk about that, Dave.
Well, I'm not an attorney. I never played one, even on TV. But I'll say this: qualified immunity never protects a law enforcement officer when they have done wrongdoing. And that's the whole problem, is this qualified immunity is that mundane day-to-day protection you and I had, that if we followed the rules, we obeyed the law, we were protected against the capricious acts, those frivolous things. And now with the New York City, and frankly, it's a huge movement throughout the urban, we have an urban America and then regular America now. The urbanized America, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, all the major urban centers in the Northeast, Northwest, the West, the Midwest. It's just become one-party strongholds. And for some reason, they have an intense animosity toward the local law enforcement officer. They love federal law enforcement officers because I think they're hoping there will be some manifest power that's going to come down. For instance, when the feds will take over and supervise a law enforcement agency, like you see so often under the Obama administration. I think we're going to start seeing more and more again, where justice comes in and declares oversight over this agency or that agency, and it never ends. But the problem is that places like New York City, LA, Phoenix, all these places, if you see they become more and more one party. You're seeing more and more irrational things out of the city council members. Fortunately, for instance, at Phoenix, you still see a few rational city council members. Minneapolis is insane. Portland now is talking about. Seattle are talking about. What are they thinking now? You wanted to defund. You're defunding civilization if you want to defund the
Right.
police.
Yes.
And that's what people don't understand. American law enforcement officers don't join law enforcement to hurt people. They actually believe they're going to be warriors for justice and peace and safety and sanctity. And they want to save a life. They want to be the first one in their academy class to give first aid and save a life at an accident scene. They want to be the first one to deliver a baby. They want to be the first one to arrest the major criminal because they really believe in that image of justice for all. They swore an oath to the Constitution because they believe in individual rights. And we hammer in our con law classes in the academy, the rights of the people charged and the victims and everyone in our society. And Americans have to understand, you've been getting a real bargain, a cheap dollar bargain on great cops for low money, low pay. And the only thing we ever asked for was just respect us back, honor our sacrifice, care that we care about you. And to do this defunding act and these other things we see on mainstream media and out of DC says just the opposite. And it's a mocking, negative response. And I got to tell you what, so why the police officers that are hanging up their badges and guns and walking away, I can understand it today because it's so disheartening. And I write every month trying to encourage all law enforcement officers to stay safe and keep faith in their mission. What's sad is our politicians have lost that faith in their mission,
With what we're seeing in New York, one of the things that comes almost in every shooting situation, no matter how justified you are, civil lawsuits come out. Well, imagine this new world where there is no qualified immunity, where the officer can literally be sued for anything. This is, it's going to take 10 minutes for the word to get out on the street. And officers are facing financial ruin just from hiring an attorney to defend themselves.
That's one of the problems. American law, our criminal justice system, or our entire legal process has an unfortunate trait that you really have a hard time recouping your expenses if you've been falsely accused. And that's one of the problems. In England, it's the loser pays all the way around. We sure adopted a lot of the Anglo-Saxon practices, but we left out one of the key ones. And one of the problems here is an officer can be bankrupt just by defending themselves successfully. And, we all remember we join associations. Some agencies have unions, depending on what state you're at. And a lot of people don't realize these aren't for going on strike. These are literally to give us legal protections, legal representation, to lobby on our behalf. And now it's going to be more important than ever. This is a scary time.
In fact, there are actually states that are moving to make it illegal to have a representation, union representation for attorney or for cops. Yeah, it's like full scale open warfare. Now, I want to read. This is a memo that Ed Mullins, who is the president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association for New York City. This is a letter that he wrote, a memo to his officers, and it's chilling. These are very trying times for police officers in the United States. We have been utterly abandoned by our political leadership. The mayor's office and city council have made it overwhelmingly clear they do not support law enforcement on any level. In light of the repeal of qualified immunity, you are strongly cautioned against taking any police action in which could lead to physical engagement with any person. Also, you are strongly cautioned against engaging in any search of a car, a person, or a residence unless you're 100% confident that your actions cannot be second-guessed and are unequivocally within the bounds of the law. In the event that you conduct a search or use force during the course of your tour of duty, you are subjecting you and your family to potential civil liability and monetary damages from the person with whom you are interacting. He is basically telling his police officers, do nothing.
Yes. The way this is going, there'll be a time where we'll be just like firefighters. We'll be sitting in a centralized station. We'll have our chili on the pot. We'll be sitting around waiting, and then we'll get a call, and 3 or 4 of us will jump in a patrol vehicle and respond, depending on the nature of the call. This is the thing. City of Tucson, let's take it. They have lost so much under this leadership they have here, that now they don't respond to almost anything. But tragically, for instance, there was a fatal accident a couple months ago where the community service officer took the report. Pictures weren't even taken.
Accident?
A fatal accident that was handled by a community service officer. And again, there weren't even photographs taken. The victim that died, or the person involved in the accident that died, was still alive when the CSO came, so it just did a little minor. It was essentially an insurance report. You and I both know a fatal accident's a homicide. It needs to be investigated. Humans have been killed. We need to figure it out. This is the kind of insanity where you and I, we see it and we're like, well, of course this happened. Yet when these politicians do these things, they're like, oh no, this is going to solve this problem. It never solves just that problem. It creates ripple effects. But this is the day and age of the unintended consequence. And the American people are going to pay a high price for this, because this is a terrible, terrible trend. And these are the kind of things where we have counted on our law enforcement officers. Our constabulary is the world's leader. America is a great experiment in law enforcement, because each state has its own rules and regulations. Each municipality often has their own training. So you've had this great laboratory of law enforcement techniques, skills, and ability, and now it's jeopardized. I guarantee you the movement is federalization, and then liberty's gone very shortly thereafter.
Really scary times. And it's a little disconcerting to me that we hear almost no outcry from the very citizens whose lives are in danger because of these decisions. It's just like they don't even exist.
No. And I got to tell you, the other thing that I find so concerning is the inability of law enforcement to guide the narrative toward the factual reality. You and I are talking this, and yet I don't see major chiefs associations talking about it. Instead, they're the first ones to jump on the political correct, the woke wagon, and that hasn't helped America in any way. Not more than a couple weeks before this terrible incident in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Police Department was teaching pronoun use, proper pronoun selection to their patrol officers. This is the most woke, progressive agency in the United States, and yet it's been eviscerated. A precinct burned down, its people denigrated, and the politicians led the charge. Leadership has been moot. The men and women of Minneapolis have always cared. I've trained there many, you've been there many times. They're very professional, very well-educated group. And the thing is that, gang, nowhere in the world are you going to find a better constabulary, a law enforcement, police officer, whatever you want to call them, than here in the United States. And they're destroying it. And it's going to be, I have no idea what my grandchildren will live under, but it really gives me nightmares.
I understand. I actually had a few cocktails with a Minneapolis officer the other day. And we only hear bits and pieces of it. Listening to the war stories of this guy telling me about the backroom deals and the morale, just being in the tubes there, it's pretty. It's not only disgusting; it's disappointing on a whole bunch of different levels, and the ramifications of this, Dave, are going to be felt in ways that people can't even conceive of what's coming down the road.
No, that's the problem. Unintended consequences are going to magnify as this goes on. That's the problem. The tragedy in Minneapolis, like so many of these major urban centers, is these young men and women joined those agencies because they wanted to continue this tradition of service. They wanted to protect their community. They really care. and to denigrate them like this, to treat them like this is a shame on our democracy, a shame on our republic. And the problem is there will be no coming to justice in this. In the end, it's only a tragedy. And the thing is, you see things cascading. The crime rate, the homicide rate, crimes against property, they're all getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And the very things that you and I readily identify are the cause are being ignored by in fact, I'll tell you what, most of our politicians today are doubling down on the same mistakes that created the crisis to begin with. They have no learning curve. And that's the problem. It's a terrible time for our society.
So I'm going to talk about a lawmaker right now, and the headline here: after this last shooting. First of all, we had the Atlanta shooting, horrible shooting. But let me bring that up for just a moment, because I don't know about you, but this angered me. This 21-year-old goofball murdering piece of human garbage targeted Asian masseuses who he had apparently utilized their services in the past, and killed a whole bunch of people. I think 8 people, 6 of them being Asian masseuses. He needs to go. He needs the lethal injection, as far as I'm concerned. But the politicization of this has gone to some weird extreme, to the point where the president of the United States orders the flags in front of the White House and across the world in American institutions to be flown at half staff. Can you grasp that?
It's the problem with this is like so many things today. The politicians have no shame when it comes to politicizing a tragedy, and no ability to apparently articulate anything but their ideological viewpoint. He's got this racist. There is this ideological fantasy that white racism is some huge plot in the United States. They're trying to find it under every rock and cranny. So when an emotionally disturbed guy goes out and kills what are believed to be sex workers because of his addiction, it's believed he probably utilized some of those locations.
Right.
It isn't a moment of reflection or introspection or ideas about what we could do to actually solve mental health issues, or maybe human trafficking issues, which might be brought up by this. But instead, we try to extrapolate bizarre meanings, and we accuse people of things, and it's got no good end in it, because when you try to draw the teleological end of where all these implications are by being so racist as to call one race of people racist only, and whiteness be some kind of sin, where does that end? What is that? It's obvious that it's racist on its face when you have a mayor saying, well, we'll give all these special benefits now to everybody but white poor people. Well, wait a minute, that's the antithesis of everything we've ever talked about in our society. And yet they use this logic turned on its head, this new racism that they have, which implies a bias against people who they feel are somehow inferior and need them to come in. You and I, over a beer, could talk about this for hours, but now we're not even allowed to talk about it in public, because they're like, well, how dare you? Because you are a Caucasian person, you can't describe this. Well, I can. I've been studying this my whole life. My minor was sociology. So I studied the poor, and I studied all the poor. I studied criminology. I studied all these things. The problems we talked about in 1972 and 73 and 74 are the same exact problems today, because we haven't solved those core social issues. But what we've done is quit talking about really solving problem and entered this bizarre blame game for political power. And it's terrifying, because, gang, it has no good end. If you look down the line, if you actually rationally think about this, no more law enforcement. You're going to pit one race against the other constantly. Wait a minute. You got chaos and aggravation, tension, and fear. Well, what does that lead to? No good end in the end, gang.
So the president of the United States orders the flag to be flown at half staff for 6 murdered Asian masseuses. We had this horrendous shooting in Boulder just a week ago, where a police officer, Eric Talley, literally sacrificed his life running into the scene to try and protect people. Did he fly the flag at half mast for him?
No. Drop my mic there. No, the issue becomes, of course, why we're picking and choosing who's a greater tragedy, who's these are the whole things. We there were 2 other people killed in Atlanta. We ignore them, and because it doesn't fit a specific narrative, we go over.
Right.
The whole thing in Boulder becomes focused on not the heroic of the responding officer or the tragedy of the people killed by this guy, but instead that the gun is this vile creature that must be eviscerated from our society. And gang, this is the kind of thing, like you said, the half mast. That's political posturing, and yet at the same time, nobody can criticize it because the media has now become mostly a propaganda arm. You study the nature of propaganda. It's to instigate people, and that's what most of the news is nowadays, frankly.
So, Chicago has been a war zone for years. The amount of violence there, the murder capital of the country. Literally every weekend, it's another record-breaking weekend for shootings and murders. And yet, they tout that Illinois has the strictest gun laws in the country.
Right.
The strictest gun laws in the country. But now here's a lawmaker who wants to reduce potential sentences for gun crimes. At the same time, the state pushes for gun control. This is absolutely astounding to me. Democratic Illinois state representative has proposed legislation that would remove some mandatory sentencing for enhancements for gun crimes. State Representative LaShawn Ford introduced a bill to amend these laws. We remove mandatory sentence enhancements, allow the presiding judge to determine whether and to add enhancements for gun-related felonies that could keep the defendant in jail for an additional 10 years or more. He doesn't want the judge to have that ability. So as we see the body count stack up literally in Chicago, instead of addressing that problem, the problem of not enforcing the state laws that are allegedly the toughest in the nation, we have a lawmaker that is trying to marginalize those laws so they don't have the same teeth. And at the same time, he's pushing gun control as the answer to the crime, to the crime problem. Let's push the gun control. This is absurd.
Well, boy, I tell you what, you could not write an absurdist comedy as bizarre as these states have become. Now, my wife was 29 years a Chicago suburban cop, and the thing was that there was a standing joke with them how you arrest a guy for a gun crime, a gangbanger, on Monday, on Tuesday he's out with an ankle bracelet. This is the thing is. They have always winked at gun crime in the Chicago area. People don't believe this, but it's true. And that's one of the big problems. As long as you're a gangster, you're good to go. And that's the problem with Chicago. That's the problem with so many of the things that we see today. They're totally contradictive if you do a second level logic, say, okay, if I do this, this will happen right now, but what will happen later? What is the ramification of it? There isn't ever any thought about that. And what's interesting, like you said, is it because it's all based on emotion, there is no sense of the system. How does the system work? How are the interrelated parts going to react when I do this? And what about over here? Well, if I have gun control laws, but I still got gangsters committing crimes that I'm not punishing them, how is that going to diminish my homicide rate? How is that going to diminish my crimes against property, my carjacking? It's not. And that's the problem. You have a society that's immersed in guns. Suddenly you want to take away the guns. Well, we were a culture that used to raise our children how to shoot. We used to know or to expect them to be able to use firearms effectively. You know, it was often taught in schools. We've gone way far away from that, yet still most Americans still believe in the Second Amendment. Politicians don't, and they at least not articulate it. And so you're in a situation where the city of Chicago is falling further and further into decay. And this is one of the things we saw this coming way back when they started talking about procedural justice. If you studied it, no one studied it. It was just, oh, it's just going to be so much more just because it's retributive, it's restorative, it's this or that. And you guys used to do retribution. Retributive justice was bad. Restorative justice is good. Procedural justice is good. In other words, restorative justice, the justice is going to lift her blindfold and see, whoa, what was that guy's background? What's his socioeconomic needs? What is the oppression? This intersectionality they talk about. All this is grievance politics. It does no good. And the problem too is that nobody's critiquing it outside of intellectual circles. You got some conservative intellectuals who write from time to time, but I almost never hear anybody on most common communication systems or networks really talk about the core problems. Everybody should go read A Theory of Justice. You can't really read it. It's boring as all get out by Rawls, John Rawls, but he was a angry atheistic philosopher who wrote a book about law that everybody loved back in the 80s, and it became theory, and now we're seeing it all comes true, that we're not going to have real justice because that's evil, that's retribution. And so, but again, the fact that I know this does me no good because I have to pretend I don't know anything when I read the newspaper or watch TV. Because if I know what I know, then I try to explain it to people. They go, "Well, that's not true. Listen to what the guy on TV said." Well, okay, but that is true. When they start talking about procedural justice, everybody wanted to jump on board. Well, it's an open way of doing justice. It's more than that, gang. It's study it. Tell me about it. It's just like so many things nowadays. It becomes just a catchphrase with no meaning to us. Yet to the people who use the catchphrase, it's got a huge amount of meaning, and it's going to be to take your power away and enhance their power.
It's in essence buzzword bingo.
Yes, exactly right. And they always smile when they say it, and we're going to have procedural justice, Well, what exactly do you mean? I mean, well, we're going to be open and we're going to look at all this. Well, wait, that's not what justice traditionally does. Justice, in fact, doesn't look at anything but the facts and then tries the facts. And now
but there's no longer any sense of consequences for actions, which is what this whole thing comes down to. There are no longer consequences. There's no more self-accountability. Everybody's a victim, and who gets hurt is you don't even hear about victims of crime anymore. It's like they don't even exist. No. And this is really the tragedy that is happening across America, is that there is no longer focus on victims. The focus is only on the excuses and the trying to camouflage the criminality aspects. And we've kind of run out of time here, buddy. I mean, you and I could talk about what's happening in law enforcement for hours, and we will do that again. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join me here at the Voice of American Law Enforcement, because your insight is fantastic.
Well, Randy, again, thank you for your voice out there. You're crying out in the wilderness, and some of us hear you, and I know it matters. And again, this is such an important program, and everybody pay attention to what's going on. And that's what's more important. I guess in a republic, people have to be aware and stay knowledgeable. And you're helping to educate them. Thanks, man.
Well, it's my pleasure. And for want the viewers to be aware of the organization that Dave and his wife Betsy are spokespeople for, the National Police Association. They're doing fantastic work.
Thank you, Randy.
Hello, this is Randy Sutton, the founder of the Wounded Blue, with some exciting news about our major event of the season, the Brothers in Blue Bash. We've had to postpone it a couple of times because of the COVID mess, but we now have a firm date of October 30th, 2021. The Brothers in Blue Bash will be the largest celebration of law enforcement unity and pride in America. And it's to benefit for the Wounded Blue, the national assistance and support organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. Admit it, everybody's looking for a reason to come to Las Vegas, and now you have it. The Brothers in Blue Bash will be held in Las Vegas on October 30th at 7 p.m. at the beautiful Ahern Hotel, which is just off the famed Las Vegas Strip. The Brothers in Blue Bash will be the law enforcement celebration of the year, and you do not want to miss it. If you're active duty, if you're retired, if you want to show your support for law enforcement, or hell, if you just want to join me for a drink or six, well, you're all welcome. This event will feature some amazing surprise speakers, fantastic food, entertainment, raffles, great silent and live auctions, and awards to be given to some deserving law enforcement officers from around the nation, all for less than $100 a ticket. You do not want to miss this event. I promise you it will be memorable. The Ahern Hotel is also giving some special discounts for those who are attending this event for about $100 a night. You can stay in this amazing boutique hotel. How do you get the tickets for this fantastic night? Easy. You can either go to our Facebook page at the Brothers in Blue Bash or go to our website, thewoundedblue.org, and register there. I'm really excited about this incredible evening, and you should be too. The Brothers in Blue Bash, October 30th, in Las Vegas, the largest celebration of law enforcement unity and pride in America to benefit the Wounded Blue. Be there. Thanks.
Each week here on the Voice of American Law Enforcement, we honor those men and women of the profession who have made the ultimate sacrifice and given their lives in the line of duty. We call it End of Watch. Unfortunately, this week I have way too many names to read. The first is Correctional Officer Robert McFarland of the Iowa Department of Corrections. Correctional Officer Robert McFarland and Nurse Lorena Schulte were assaulted and beaten to death by two inmates in the Aramosa State Penitentiary Infirmary during an escape attempt. The inmates had developed a ruse to gain access to the infirmary by claiming to be there as part of a prison repair program. Once inside, they attacked Officer McFarland and Nurse Schulte with hammers, inflicting fatal skull injuries on both. Another inmate inside the infirmary attempted to protect Officer McFarland and Nurse Schulte, but was attacked and suffered a skull fracture. The two inmates then attempted to use a grinder to break through the exterior window and protective bars, but were unsuccessful. They briefly took another nurse hostage before fleeing back into the prison, where they were subdued. The two inmates had been serving lengthy sentences for robbery convictions. Both were subsequently charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and abduction. Officer McFarland has served with the Iowa Department of Corrections for 15 years and also served with the Ely Volunteer Fire Department. Correctional Officer Robert McFarland, Iowa Department of Corrections. End of watch Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. The next is Senior Master Trooper Todd A. Hannikin of the Illinois State Police. Senior Master Trooper Todd Hannikin was killed in a single vehicle crash on Illinois 10 near County Road 600 in Bondville. His vehicle left the roadway before striking a utility pole and a tree at about 10:45 a.m. Trooper Hannikin is survived by his wife, two sons, parents, and brother. His father also served with the Illinois State Police. Senior Master Trooper Todd A. Hannikin, Illinois State Police. End of watch Thursday, March 25th, 2021. The next is Corporal Kyle Jeffrey Davis, Washington County Sheriff's Office in Oklahoma. Corporal Kyle Davis died after being assaulted inside of the county correctional facility while booking a prisoner. 17 subjects have been arrested as part of a large multi-agency narcotics investigation and were being booked into the jail. One of the men began to struggle with officers while being booked and struck Corporal Davis in the chest, causing him to suffer a ruptured aorta. He was transported to a local hospital where he passed away approximately 1 hour later. Corporal Davis has served with the Washington County Sheriff's for 13 years, survived by his wife and 2 children. Corporal Kyle Jeffrey Davis, Washington County Sheriff's Office, Oklahoma. End of watch Thursday, March 25th, 2021. The next is Trooper Joseph Gallagher of the New York State Police. Trooper Joseph Gallagher succumbed to injuries sustained on December 18th, 2017, when he was struck by a vehicle. Trooper Gallagher was assisting a motorist on the westbound Long Island Expressway at the entrance ramp to the Sagatos Parkway when he was struck by a passing motorist who was distracted by 3 texting conversations. Trooper Gallagher was seriously injured and died 3 years later from his injuries. The driver of the vehicle that struck the trooper was arrested, charged with third-degree assault and criminal negligence. He was sentenced to 30 days time served. Trooper Gallagher was served with the New York State Police for 7 years. He is survived by his wife and 2 children. Trooper Joseph Gallagher, New York State Police, end of watch Friday, March 26, 2021. Each of these officers served and died to protect the people. May they rest in peace. Hey, thanks for joining us again this week here on the Voice of American Law Enforcement on our redvoicemedia.com. Each week, we try to bring you all the news about law enforcement. If you want to contact me, you can find me on Facebook at Randy Sutton, the Voice of American Law Enforcement. I urge you to contact me if you've got story ideas or comments about the show. Check me out at Randy Sutton, the Voice of American Law Enforcement on Facebook. Thanks again, and remember, always, always protect those who you love.
Hello, I'm Randy Sutton, the founder of the Wounded Blue, the national assistance and support organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. I have an exciting announcement to make concerning what will be one of the most important law enforcement training events in America, the Wounded Blues Law Enforcement Survival Summit, to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, October 28th, 29th, and 30th of this year. If you only attend one training conference this year, this is the one for you. Law Enforcement Survival Summit will feature some of the most important voices in American law enforcement, and it will encompass every aspect of surviving a law enforcement career: physical survival, emotional, psychological survival, legal survival, even family and relationship survival, amongst other topics. But the Law Enforcement Survival Summit is much more than just instruction. It is inspirational. Your lives will be touched by Phoenix police officer Jason Schechterle's story of survival and triumph after being horribly burned when his patrol car was struck. You'll be moved by the words of former Marine pilot Silouan Green, whose tragic jet crash changed the course of his life. Incredible speakers, amazing instructors, phenomenal entertainment by the world's funniest cop, Mike Mancini, and a country concert by the incredible Ryan Weaver will blow you away. Take a look at the lineup of trainers and speakers at this incredible training conference by going to our website at thewoundedblue.org, and you'll see why you need to be here. You might be asking yourself, is this a training conference for me? Well, if you're serving as a law enforcement officer in any capacity, from patrol to administration, then the answer is yes. If you have served and are struggling with issues of post-traumatic stress injury, then the answer is yes. If you love a cop and want to be truly understanding of their challenges and their feelings, then the answer is yes. You do not want to wait to register for this conference. There will be limited in-person availability, and for just $295, you'll get access to all of the training, plus the performances by Mike Mancini and Ryan Weaver, and that includes breakfast and lunch. The Ahern Hotel is giving amazing discounts on their luxurious rooms for about $100 a night. We're working on a virtual option as well, and if you prefer that option, you can note that on your application. The Wounded Blue is incredibly grateful to the Martin Harris Construction Company in Las Vegas for making this conference possible. Register now at thewoundedblue.org. Reserve your space before it's too late. The Wounded Blue's National Law Enforcement Survival Summit, to be held October 28th through the 30th in Las Vegas at the fabulous Ahern Hotel. I will see you there. Thank you.